All right, Steve and Lindsay, psyched to have you guys here. So let's start by giving a little background info on how you guys got into fitness in the first place and then how you made it a career.
So my background, in college, I studied kinesiology. I used to want to be an orthopedic surgeon. But then I decided I did not want to be in school until I was 40. So my mom said to me one day, like, Linz, have you ever thought about getting involved in like physical therapy or in more of like the rehab component of orthopedic surgery? And so that kind of got my wheels turning. So I ended up applying to a bunch of physical therapy schools out of college. And I ended up going to a school in Florida called the University of St. Augustine, which led me down a path of getting into occupational therapy, which is pretty similar to physical therapy. A lot of the goals are a little bit different, though. So we focus a little more on function and why it's important for you to be able to get up and walk in life. So I specialized a lot in neuro rehab initially out of school. I worked a lot with like head injuries, spinal cord injuries, strokes, teaching them how to get dressed again, how to brush their teeth, how to communicate, how to do all of the very basic everyday things in life. But my heart was always in fitness and just keeping people healthy so they never hopefully got to that point of having a stroke or whatever it was. And in the realm of the traditional medical model, I was getting to the point where I loved what I did, but I wanted to have more entrepreneurship type of opportunities.
Okay.
And I feel like that's much easier to do in an orthopedic realm versus neuroscience. You know, you kind of need the doctors and you need the medical team when you're dealing with those types of things. So it kind of brought me back full circle of, you know, getting back more into fitness. I started doing a little more personal training a few years ago when Steve and I opened a few other businesses. And that kind of led me into the path that I'm in now, which I opened my own business called Simply Stretch LA, which is like LA's premier fascial stretch therapy clinic, where we specialize in fascial stretch therapy.
And what was your fitness like? Like, how did you first get into fitness when you were younger? Like, first start with weight training and whatnot?
So I played a lot of like softball and country sports back in the day. I grew up in a little tiny farm town in Pennsylvania. And so we, you know, did a lot of those types of sports. And I was always really interested in more traditional fitness, but where I'm from, people don't necessarily go to like a traditional gym.
Yeah.
So with my aunt, I would do like her aerobics classes with her and that kind of thing. And then when I went to Penn State for my undergraduate degree, that's when I really got involved with more organized exercise type of things.
Okay.
So
you never really lifted before college?
Not before college.
Okay.
Not really.
Yeah.
But then when I went to Penn State and majored in kinesiology, then I really got into it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was your training like at the time?
At that time, I did a lot of like isolated exercises, kind of like bodybuilding type of things. Really was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and where my niche was at that time. So I dabbled in like rugby and, you know, all these other sports because I didn't really know where my niche was.
Right.
And then in grad school, Steve and I tried to get into running a lot because I thought that maybe that was my thing. And that ended up not being something that I really loved. And then eventually I found CrossFit, and that's really what changed my life. I am a really competitive person, and I like the objective measures that you see in CrossFit.
Yeah.
So that kind of, you know, reeled me in like it does a lot of other people and has really helped with everything like that.
All right. Well, I definitely want to get more into that.
Yeah.
Steve, what about you?
So I played sports my entire life. Really got big into football. I'm from Florida. My school is a very big football school. We're constantly competing for the state title. From there, I walked on at University of Central Florida for football. Played there for a year. Outside linebacker.
Okay.
So I was a little bit bigger then. I walked around about 225. I'm about 205 now.
Okay.
But I really enjoyed it, but I had to make a decision on where I was going from there, whether I was going to be a professional athlete or a professional in life, and I chose the latter. So from there, I went into athletic training, did my degree at UCF. I got to work with, you know, all the D1 sports teams there. I did an internship with the Atlanta Falcons. From there, I went into physical therapy school.
Who was the strength coach when you were there? Do you remember?
I don't remember. It was so long ago.
Okay.
They're all massive dudes, but the training camp was kind of a blur for me because every day was, you know, working 5:30 in the morning until 10:30 to 11 o'clock at night for, 7 weeks straight. no days off. So a lot of it was kind of a blur.
Right.
It was a cool experience, but that's basically my memories of it. But yeah, then I switched into physical therapy, and my first job out, was working with athletes. We worked with like a lot of the Jacksonville Jaguars and a lot of pro baseball players when we lived in Jacksonville.
So what, were you working at like a private strength and conditioning facility at the time?
It was more of like a sports physical therapy clinic, a very large sports physical therapy clinic where we were like kind of the go-to place for all the athletes.
Okay.
And that was what really got me interested in working with athletes. I mean, I knew I always wanted to do that because as an athlete myself, I just could relate very easily.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, moved out to California, and I started doing CrossFit in Florida, but then I transferred more into California because it's just so big out here.
Right.
So that was kind of a nice entry point for me. And I saw a huge opportunity in the fact that when I was doing CrossFit, because it was so new, no one really knew what the hell they're doing. So injuries were very common.
Sure.
Because people just really didn't know how to move well. So I saw a niche there, and it gave me an opportunity to just start seeing some clients at my gym. And over the last 4 years has organically developed into this thing I have now, which is Prehab to Perform, where we specialize in treating CrossFit athletes, but really athletes of all types. We have people who are, teenagers up until, guys who are 60 years old who used to play sports when they're younger and want to get in shape, but they're afraid of getting hurt. So, I kind of create that nice little balance between PT and personal training.
Yeah. And talk about the evolution of your training. Like, what was it like then, and how did it evolve when you first started getting into lifting? Did you get into lifting for sports, or because you were skinny and weak, or what was the deal? Like as a kid, the first time?
It's funny. So my dad got me a weight set when I was maybe like 14 years old.
Okay.
And what happened is that when I was 15, I kind of blew out my left knee. So for about like 6 months, all I was left with, the only thing I could do is lift weights. Mm-hmm. So I remember I just got really strong as a freshman in high school. And from there, I just realized how much I love doing that. And I was very fortunate enough, too, that my school at the time did Olympic weightlifting. That being power cleans. And, that was pretty much the extent of my weightlifting. But I just knew that I really liked it because I saw the benefits at a very young age. Mm-hmm. So fast forward, a few years, I still continued to do the bodybuilding thing, for aesthetics, but also I continued to want to get stronger. And then when I got introduced into CrossFit, that was really a nice blend because I loved doing the Olympic movements so much, like the cleans, whatever. You just can't do that in a regular gym, without me getting kicked out.
Right.
So CrossFit was nice that I could kind of start doing that in there as well. And then I saw my first regionals competition in Florida where one of my buddies was competing in. And immediately being in that environment, I'm like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to get into competitive CrossFit because the thing that's nice about it is that Lindsay was saying is that there's objective kind of goals and measures and whatnot. You're doing it to get in good shape, but you're also doing it now to kind of get that competition back in your life.
Yeah.
And that's something I felt like I was lacking for many years, just, post college of, I'm lifting weights, but what am I doing this for? There was no end goal.
Right.
Whereas CrossFit kind of now presented that end goal of, I could actually compete and I could do this. And so that was really fun because it really got me much more focused with my training, and not just my training, but how I was eating and then how I was sleeping and just the recovery. And, it also really changed the way that I started to treat my clients from a physical therapy perspective, because now you actually treat the way that they squat, because now that actually how to squat better. Mm-hmm. So it's been kind of fun to see how they both feed off of each other.
So let's talk about some of the issues with CrossFit, the injuries, some of the programming things. How would you guys, in my opinion, timing certain things is a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. You can't do high skill movements and the goal is speed. I feel like there's not enough horizontal pulling. You could easily make most CrossFit reduce the number of shoulder injuries if you just add in some ring rows and stuff like that. Talk about that a little, and especially because you guys do body maintenance and care for a living, so I'd imagine you cringe at some of the. Obviously some places are outstanding, and some places the programming is awful. What are some of the general things that you would like to change? You know, can make it safer. Maybe
it's definitely evolved a ton over the years. Like from where it was, 5-7 years ago is very different from what it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, then it was a total gamble on whatever gym you walked into. You had no idea what you're walking into. Right. Whether or not the coach literally had no training at all. They just took their L1 and else, and they think they're a great coach. So the injuries, I would say, are getting much smarter now.
Yeah.
But you're right. There still is some issues with the programming, and it's very hard to kind of make the programming work for everyone because everyone's very different.
Yeah. The
thing that I see the most issues with is the fact that CrossFit isn't necessarily dangerous. The movements aren't dangerous. It's the people are. Sure. They come in, they've been sitting at a desk all day long, and their shoulders are really tight and they're really round. And if they don't warm up adequately beforehand, and we ask them to do like a snatch or some lift overhead or even like kipping pull-ups, then the chance of injury just significantly improves. So with that being said, what I would change and what we've done at Paradiso CrossFit is we've created not just a warm-up, but actual prehab. Things that you should do prior to kipping pull-ups to open up your shoulders to make sure that they're in a better position for your warm-up, and then for the actual strength portion, then for the actual...
And you program that into the warm-ups?
Yeah. So awesome. That's like our pre-warm-up. So like that's what the people do before class, before they actually start doing anything with the coach.
Yeah.
Like it's usually a series of like 3 movements that they do to get them nice and prepared for class to begin.
Yeah.
Because there's just not enough time in the actual warm-up. I mean, our warm-ups are designed to, address the mobility component, but really just to get the heart rate up, get them ready for class.
Right.
So the prehab element has really kind of enhanced and reduced injuries.
Yeah.
So.
Anything to add? Any thoughts?
I think that one thing that people also are becoming more in tune with, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement still, is the recovery and the cool down component. So a lot of people are, doing really well as to like warming up and all that, and everyone knows that they need to stretch. Everyone knows they need to cool down, but I think that's something that people are still kind of slipping out the doors without doing religiously.
We'll talk about the importance of that. Like let's cover both. Let's cover a warm up and a cool down. What do you guys think are some essentials? Obviously, it depends on the day, the workout, the individual, but kind of an overall big picture. What are some key warm up exercises you like? Some areas to mobilize, warm up, whatever.
It's one of those. Let's get specific with the actual movement. So if we're going to do any sort of squatting that day, okay, obviously, most people have, tightness in their hips or in their ankles. Okay. So if they have that, then doing some sort of mobilization technique, ideally something dynamic before they get going. For example, if it's a female and she's been wearing heels all day and stuck in plantar flexion, well, we want to get those dorsiflexors to wake up. So I like doing, where I put a kettlebell around their ankles and I'll have them do some ankle circles to literally wake up those muscles that have been dormant all day long.
Nice.
Followed by some active, dynamic ankle stretching, which will then help them facilitate a better squat. Because I would say that with women, they actually typically have very flexible hips, but they have very immobile ankles. Guys, it's usually the opposite. Guys usually have very tight hips, so opening up their external rotators, I would say, is the most common. Tightness in their piriformis and their glutes really prevents them from getting into a deep squat. Or if they do get into a deep squat, because it's so tight, they get like a nice butt wink, which, destroys the lordosis in their back and increases the compressive forces on their back. So doing something like banded monster walks followed by banded hip circles to not just wake up those muscles, but also to lubricate the joints and the fascia. So I tell people your warm-up needs to be very specific. You don't have to do 1,000 things. You just have to do a handful very well, and it really should be 20 minutes or less. These people who show up and do 45 minutes of warming up before class even starts, they're wasting a lot of time.
Yeah.
They're wasting a lot of energy. They need to just get very specific on what they need. And to take a step back further, learning what they need is essential first. And that's kind of one thing that me and Lindsay do very well, is teaching our clients like what they actually need. Once they know what they need, then they can get very specific on their actual warm-up. And again, 20 minutes or less, get the heart rate up, focus on the specific joints that need to be opened up, and go from there.
Do you guys have a general screening thing that you like, or maybe a video or something on your website?
It's something that we don't necessarily have that, but I have a very specific like assessment routine that I go through to identify those areas of weakness. So we certainly can add that.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, if you guys had like a little video that people could follow along at home, we could put it on the show notes. And then some of the exercises you guys mentioned throughout, if you have videos, we can add them to the show notes too. Mm-hmm. So let's dive a little deeper onto the squat. What are some issues on the squat that people can fix, like without coming to see you guys? What can they do at home, or what could they go to see a fascial stretch therapist for? Because a lot of people have trouble squatting. So what are some of the other issues? You mentioned ankle mobility, hip mobility.
Yeah. So first and foremost, before you worry about strength, you have to have mobility first, right? So Steve was talking about the hip mobility that people tend to struggle with the squat, also ankle mobility. Those are the two really big things that we find with squatting that people have a hard time with. Also, like thoracic extension. We got some people that get all the way down on the bottom, but then their torso is like parallel to the floor, and that obviously is not a great position to be in, especially if you have load on your back. In regards to the squat, making sure that you're stretching out your glutes pretty regularly, especially in the world of CrossFit. I mean, we squat literally every day in some way, shape, or form. So people's quads, their hip flexors, their glutes, they all get very, very tight. And a lot of people don't even know how tight they are because the way that we function in daily life, whether it be walking, sitting, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really require the glutes and those muscle groups to be extended. Yep. So a lot of times all of that will be brewing and getting tighter and tighter as life goes on. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, their back hurts or their hip hurts or their knee hurts. And they think that it's their back, hip, or knee that's the issue. And really it's usually like the hip musculature, the glutes, the quads, all of that's like really tight and causing imbalances. So a lot of times, I recommend to my clients, almost everyone can benefit from doing some variation of pigeon every day because most people spend a lot of time sitting every day. Another stretch that I always recommend to basically 99% of my clients is a couch stretch. That's a great stretch to do to really open up your hip flexors and your quads. Because again, everyone's sitting and squatting every day.
I know you have pictures of that that we'll put up with the show notes.
Yeah. So I would say that those are by far the two most important stretches that I find. Okay. In addition to calf stretching, which Steve briefly touched upon too.
Talk about the negatives of wearing high heels.
So, number one, I've never really been one to wear high heels that often because they're extremely uncomfortable. Yeah. But like Steve said, they position your foot so you're in a plantar flex position all day. So when you're in that position 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, every single day at work, you're basically creating almost like a splint for your ankle and foot that's putting you in that ballerina type of position. So in that happening, the joint and the ankle joint itself is getting super stiff. The muscles of your calves are getting really shortened and tight. And then, you try to go into a squat, which is the exact opposite motion. Right. And then you're stuck. So it could be like the actual ankle joint that's stuck, the calf that is extremely tight, so that's definitely an issue with a lot of women that we see that have, normal corporate jobs or wear high heels.
And even moving your way up the chain past the calves, a lot of women who wear heels a lot also have back pain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it, again, because it just forces their low back to get into excessive lordosis, causes their hip flexors to get tighter. And, it just causes that increased compression on their back. So there's like a lot of things that are just so negative about wearing heels. And it's kind of funny you also bring up heels because I also would like to mention that wearing like Olympic weightlifting shoes all of the time when you squat and when you lift, which is a lot of things that a lot of CrossFitters like to use as a crutch. Yeah. That's essentially like the same thing of wearing heels for a woman.
Glad you brought that up.
Because it just creates this crutch that they can, create like a better squat out of in the short term. Yeah. But in the long term, if they ever try to get out of those lifters and try to get into a more flat shoe, where they have to do a workout where there's running and then squat snatches, they're screwed. Yeah. It just creates so many problems. And there's so many people that try to fix their poor squat by adding lifters into the equation. And it's just not a good long-term solution.
Do you guys think everyone is capable of doing a below parallel squat?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Barring, some sort of like traumatic injury that like hardware had to go into the body. I mean, the amazing thing about the body is that there's so many different joints that, if some are lacking and they're lacking, whether it's like a genetic thing or again, an injury thing, others can make up for it.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that everyone is capable of doing a 400-pound squat, but I think that everyone is capable of doing some sort of a safe below parallel squat. It just requires a little bit of training. They need to have a good balance between mobility, strength, and control. If they have a good balance between those three, that there's no reason why most people cannot have a good below parallel squat.
Let's talk about, I liked how you made it specific for the warm-up. So we talked about squat. Let's say someone's going overhead. Let's talk about shoulder, thoracic mobility, stuff like that. What do you want to see in the warm-up for that?
So my warm-ups, I like to really start with some sort of like soft tissue prep. So like for me, if we want to get specific with overhead, I like to get out the foam roll and I'll do foam rolling of the thoracic spine. Okay, if they've been sitting all day, let's open up the thoracic spine, get the joints moving better so they're out of that flexed position. Then I'll just shift it right over and foam roll the lats, okay? Because most people's lats, especially when they're doing something like CrossFit or if they're doing bodybuilding where they're doing like a lot of like pull-ups, most people's lats are a lot tighter than they should be. From there, I love going into my drill called the keg drill, which is where, and I definitely have videos of this, where the foam roll is underneath the thoracic spine. The person then grabs onto a barbell that's over their head, and they progressively try to get a little bit more range of motion. That has a ton of carryover to lifting overhead, snatching, pressing, or even hanging onto a barbell or a bar doing some sort of pull-up.
Yeah, you showed me that one. It's great. I feel great when I do that.
It is literally the most uncomfortable stretch that you'll do for your upper body.
Yeah.
But as long as you're staying within the uncomfortable strong range and not going into the sharp pinching range, then it's a great stretch for most people. Okay, there's some people that can't even get into that, and there's certainly modifications for that, but it's highly effective. So once you get those tissues, opened up a little bit better, then I might shift into some sort of like banded routine, where we grab just one of the long resistance bands. We might do some banded pull-aparts, some banded pass-throughs. Another banded routine I call shoot the arrows, where it adds in a little bit of rotation. Because that's also another area that most people lack, especially when it comes to shoulder mobility, is actually rotation. Rotation of the thoracic spine, the ability for the scapulas to retract when you open up. It's something that a lot of people neglect. People like to stay very linear with their warm-ups. So adding in a little bit of rotation like that can also be really beneficial for going overhead.
Do you think, do you have anything to add to that? Or
No, I think
do you think some people overdo the smashing and mashing and rolling and all that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I have to be very careful as to taking into account who I'm talking to when I tell them that I want them to be foam rolling and stretching and doing all that kind of stuff, because we're fortunate enough where we treat a lot of really motivated clients, but then you get like the people that overdo it.
Yeah.
And like they come in and they were on their foam roller for 45 minutes, rolling right over the same muscle group that entire time. They come in like super inflamed, super bruised, or they're using just like a straight up PVC pipe without any padding on it as well. So absolutely, you can definitely overdo it.
Yeah.
It's the brain plays tricks on you, because you might have like a trigger point like in your mid back, and so you grab a lacrosse ball and you start to mash it and roll it out, and it feels good and makes you feel better afterwards, but it's only for a short term that it you're not addressing the actual issue of why the trigger point came about. So you'll have people that will try to do that every day, and then you bring up the analogy is, well, do you think it's okay for you to get a deep sports massage every day? And overwhelmingly people say, well, no, like your body needs time to recover. But yet that's exactly what they're doing every single day to their bodies by being super aggressive, whether it's with a barbell or a lacrosse ball or even a foam roll. And so overdoing it, your body needs time to recover from that intense session. Otherwise, you're just creating more problems. So kind of putting that image in people's heads tends to get them to chill out a little bit more.
Yeah. Any other key warm-up drills that you guys like?
One simple thing that I like doing, and actually I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast and he kind of brought this up. So I tried it and tested it a few times. Is literally even just like hanging on a bar, just hanging there for like sets of, 30 to 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Just the act of just like hanging there really helps kind of open the shoulders up. I mean, there's really so many different like, upper extremity like warm-ups that I like, but that's something that's very simple that everyone can kind of like see the benefit of doing that. And it's easy enough for them to do, because one of the things with warm-ups is that, that I caution giving people is that if I don't actually watch them doing it, many people do it wrong. And when you do an exercise incorrectly, you might as well not even be doing it.
Right.
So it's like paying attention to the details of the exercises of the warm-up is super important. It's probably more important than the actual just like warm-up itself. So whenever you can make it simple, I always try to make it, encourage that, because the likelihood of them doing it right significantly increases.
For sure. And if you weren't going to start a training session with an Olympic lift, do you guys like to finish your warm-up with something explosive like a jump or a throw to fire up the CNS?
Yeah, I typically like to start slow with the movements just to get the muscles to fire properly and to make sure you're getting the right ones to fire at the right time. But then transitioning into some sort of like plyo movement, just working on footwork or things like that, just getting the CNS ready for that speed. It's vital if you're going to do some sort of Olympic lift.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other tips on injury-prone areas when it comes to the actual workout? Like things you should or shouldn't be doing in your training for, let's say, how do you bulletproof your shoulders? How do you avoid lower back injuries?
So, I mean, with the shoulders, for example, like Steve was touching upon, it's very important to do a thorough warm-up. So a lot of like periscapular strengthening. So something that a lot of CrossFitters are familiar with is like crossover symmetry, right? So their whole basic program is doing a lot of the periscapular strengthening to get all of the muscles of the rotator cuff firing the way they should, so they stabilize your shoulders, and then you're not getting different pinching and things like that going on with the mechanics of your pull-up or the snatches, things like that. So that's a huge one. I also think that a proper glute warm-up is imperative. Just again, we're doing a lot of squatting, so if your glutes are not firing the way they should be to stabilize your spine,
which is a lot of
and
people.
Your hips, right? Then that's when you get like a change in the kinetic chain. So you're getting different forces on your knee that is not supposed to be there, and things like that.
So what are some warm-ups for that you like?
So Steve mentioned quite a few of them already. Like monster walks is a huge one. Hip circles. Again, we can post all of these on the blog as well. It's very basic, very isolated exercises that I don't care how many times you do them, they never get easier.
Yeah.
Because those are muscle groups that can often get left behind, and you can compensate through larger muscle groups to, take over that role when really it should be like the hip stabilizers that are doing that sort of thing.
Yep.
I also think that core stability is a huge one as well, that a lot of people tend to not even necessarily think about. Just because, again, everything in CrossFit is pretty full body and functional. And so you can get away with doing jerks overhead, let's say, without a really strong core kicking in, but that's when you injure your low back with hyperextension. Or, obviously deadlifts. If your core is not stabilizing the way it should be, then that's when you can run into issues as well. So I think, doing a lot of core stabilization exercises, also knowing how to turn your core on. I think that's something that a lot of people don't even really know what to do.
Well, talk about both. How do you do that, and what are some core stabilization exercises you like?
So I like to tell people, when I try to get them to activate their core, I feel like I've heard a lot of fitness instructors over time, say, pull your belly button in. And I feel like when I pull my belly button in, I'm not doing anything, right? So what I tell my clients is pretend, and I act like I'm going to do it. Pretend I'm going to punch you in the stomach. What are you going to do? They actually activate their core. They turn everything on and they brace for that punch, right? That's how you turn your core on. So there's an exercise that Steve and I like to do to get people's cores actually firing, and it's a way to objectively measure it as well. So there's something called the Chattanooga biofeedback cuff. It looks like a blood pressure cuff. And basically you put the cuff component under your back, and then there's a dial that you can use to read. And as you activate your core, when you lay on your back, it will decrease that curve in your low back, so your back flattens out. And so the more that your core is activating, the more pressure it puts through that cuff, so the dial will go up higher and higher. And so if your core starts to burn out, or you're not able to activate it the way you need to, that dial number is just going to slowly go down. So Steve and I love doing like Tabata style holds with that, so like 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off.
And you can order one of these online?
Yeah. And we use them in our clinics as well to really get people's cores firing, because that's the thing, is that there's a subconscious component as well.
Yeah.
It's like you can turn your core on when you want to sometimes, but then it's like during a functional movement where you're thinking about catching that snatch and everything else that you need to do, is your core turning on then, right? So it's like getting that subconscious component going as well.
There's a lot of really high-level athletes that I humble with that particular exercise.
I'm sure.
Because it's crazy how you'll see someone who has like a 12-pack, and they literally have no idea how to actually engage those deep stabilizer muscles of their core.
Yeah.
Because there's essentially two layers. There's the superficial moving layer, and then there's the deep layer that you don't see that stabilizes the spine. And many high-level athletes that have low back pain have very weak dynamic stabilizers. So that's a great exercise to objectively measure progress and see how well they're activating it. Two really good core exercises that are go-to for me. One is the Swiss ball crunch. Okay, where you lie right on your back on the ball, elbows apart, and literally just going from hyperextension into neutral. Why I like that exercise for most people, especially if they have low back pain or even if they just want to wake up their core, is you're mobilizing the spine as you do it. So as you lie back in hyperextension, you're opening up that thoracic spine. And that eccentric lowering forces those deep dynamic muscles to stay active. Like even people who are very good athletes will be very shaky with that particular exercise.
Yeah.
The other reason why I like it too, you're going from hyperextension to neutral instead of neutral to flexion, which most ab exercises focus on. And it's that excessive flexion that causes a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Like you'll see a lot of people get back pain from doing sit-ups.
Yep.
Because of that particular motion. So that's a great exercise that I love focusing on. The other one is the plank. Again, going back to the details of the exercise, I feel like there's so many people that do planks incorrectly because they don't know how to do it, or they're taught the wrong way how to do it. 3 simple cues that I love with a nice solid plank. Let's say they're doing it on their elbows. I like pressing through their elbows so they'll have a nice round back instead of like a sagging shoulder, which is something that I see very commonly like with yogis, that they're taught that way. The second cue that I give is to squeeze their glutes. Okay, if they keep their glutes nice and tight throughout the plank, and then keeping their quads nice and tight. So quads tight, glutes tight, and then pressing through the shoulders. It is very hard to hold a plank for longer than a minute to 90 seconds when you're staying tight the whole time. Versus I know a lot of people who say they can hold like a 10-minute plank, but they're literally just hanging on their ligaments for 10 minutes. They're not actually activating their core at all. So those are 2 really good go-to just basic core exercises that
do you like to progress through to different levels of planks, like single arm? Yeah. For
sure. I do, but honestly, what makes more sense to me as far as progressing the core is actually integrating functional movement. I learned this very on, like post PT school, because I would work with these rowers who I would get them to do the most insane things using the biofeedback device, the highest levels that they could possibly progress to, and they still were having low back pain. It's not until you actually tie in the core strength with the functional movement, like a reverse lunge or like some sort of single leg deadlift, to actually get them to be able to maintain that midline while they're moving.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tie the 2 together, then you're still going to have some significant issues.
Sure. What about Turkish get-ups? Fan of those?
Yeah, big fan. Really, really big fan. And I'm actually a big fan of those because they're actually, as complex as they are, they're actually pretty hard to do wrong.
Yeah.
There obviously is ways that people can kind of cheat and like get through it. But when you take your time doing a Turkish get-up, man, it just wakes up everything. It's a very underutilized exercise, I think, because it's hard to coach and it takes time and but it's one of those things that's a fantastic progression with functional movement.
What about loaded carries?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of loaded carries in a actual like carry position. I also love doing front rack carries. anything in the front rack, I'm a huge fan of when it comes to activating the core. Like I love doing kettlebell front rack front squats. A lot of times I will progress someone who's been dealing with like back pain, doing like regular back squats into front rack kettlebell squats, and they'll just respond so much better because you're able to engage the core. It forces you to keep your head and chest up. So great core functional movements.
You mentioned that you weren't, in general, what's your take on lifting shoes? Like sometimes? Okay.
To be used as seldom. Like if you're an Olympic lifter training to do Olympic lifting, it's okay.
Yeah.
The analogy that I always give though is, Rich Froning snatched 315 in nanos. Yeah. And if you can lift that kind of weight in flat shoes, there's no reason why if your max is around like 135 pounds that you should be depending on lifters to help you lift more. Yeah. There's a bigger issue that you're hiding from. And so addressing those issues, in fact, will actually make you much stronger in the long run.
Yeah. What about belts? What's your guys' take on using a belt during training?
Very similar. I think that, you should not be dependent on a belt. However, when you're starting to get like in that 90-95% or going for 1 rep max, then I definitely think that at that point, being able to engage your core adequately and, just all the forces that you're going through. I mean, that's definitely when I throw it on and when I recommend it to my clients, just for extra support during those really heavy lifts.
It kind of depends on what your goals are. If your goal is just to be, an in shape dude who just wants to be like naturally like strong, then, you can go as heavy as you want without the belt and you'll be much stronger that way. The belt always will make you add more weight to the bar though. Yeah. Just adding that midline support. Once you get to, I typically don't put on the belt until I get to like my 80%, whatever that is, whether it's deadlift, whether it's squat, because I would like to engage all those core muscles so that they don't become dependent on an external device for stability.
Yeah. Ed Cohn was the greatest power lifter of all time. What he would do 12 weeks before a meet, he would go, I don't remember exactly, but he would not use a belt for like the first 6 to 8 weeks and then add the belt towards the end, which I always thought was a really smart approach. And then most smart lifters do what you guys are saying, just keep it off until you get to a certain percentage. I think that's a great idea. What about just for overall health, especially as people get older, not knee wraps, but knee sleeves to keep the joints warm, elbow sleeves, wrist wraps? What's your take on those?
So I think it really depends on the person.
Yeah.
For example, like if you don't really have any issues with your knees and whatever, I don't really think that you need to be using knee wraps, or knee sleeves.
Yeah.
People get lazy. The muscles aren't firing the way they should be. People are just bouncing out of the bottom, totally uncontrolled, just because it gives you that extra elasticity at the bottom.
Yeah. It's just like a thin, like it's not like a super strong, heavy one that you're going to compete in powerlifting. Just like if you're a guy who's 50 or something, it keeps the joints warmer.
Right. So shifting to that component. So I actually had dislocated my kneecap like 7 years ago. And so I tore all the cartilage out of my right knee. And so I find that especially with my right knee, I need to wear some kind of knee sleeve or knee wrap when I'm squatting heavy.
Okay.
Because I have very little cartilage in that knee. So I need external support. But really, that's really the only place that I really recommend people wear the knee sleeves if they really need it is for that external support. But I think
if you were going to do like glute hams after you squatted, you would take it off?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say overall not a fan. And I can say this from personal experience that for me, when I was in early stages of competitive CrossFit, I used knee sleeves all the time. Mm-hmm. And I found that during the training, it helped me alleviate the pain like when I would squat. And then afterwards, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, So for most people, I think that they use it, again, as like a crutch.
Yeah.
Because you don't feel the pain, you feel the knee sleeve.
Right.
And you depend on that. And, after eliminating all of that stuff, I actually got much stronger and I was much healthier with those movements. If your goal is just to like kind of warm up the area, it's like wearing compression shorts.
Right.
If you want to bring increased heat to the area, that I'm fine with that. But I mean, you see people literally who show up with their knee sleeves already on, before they do any movements, and they leave them on the entire time that they're working out. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
If you're going to just use seldomly, like here and there, it's okay. But I would say most people probably use them a lot more than they need to.
And do you have an opinion if someone's going to use them or needs to use them for whatever issue on the open or closed ones? Like with the open patella or closed, like the hole in them?
I feel like a lot of times the ones that have like the patella hole, like that's more of like an orthopedic issue that they're dealing with. I don't feel like we see a lot of that in CrossFit anymore.
Yeah, it seems like everyone has the closed.
Yeah, a lot of people have like the rehab ones or whatever. And again, it's one of those things that if there's like some structural issue that you're dealing with, then by all means, but obviously you need to be addressing that issue.
Yeah.
And, maybe modifying certain movements. But for the most part, I don't think that the majority of people that are wearing knee sleeves necessarily need to be.
You mentioned the Swiss ball crunch and spinal flexion. Stuart McGill is one of the top spine specialists, strongly against spinal flexion. Obviously, there's differing opinions on that. Talk about your thoughts on that, like how dangerous it is, who can do it, who should avoid it. Sit-ups, crunches, Swiss ball crunches. You mentioned a great exercise, but you don't go into spinal flexion when you do Swiss ball crunch. So
exactly. There's a statistic saying that we, on average, as human beings, flex our spine between 3,000 to 5,000 times a day. And that was taken a few years ago before the cell phone. So I would say it's probably even more than that now.
Yeah.
So encouraging that continued flexion is something that people do not need in general. What they need a hell of a lot more of is extension. Most people's posterior chain, both upper and lower, are both a mess. I would say 90% of the clients that I see, like that's a real issue. And it's important to find a core exercise, again, like the Swiss ball crunch, that you still can strengthen the core without going into the flexion, because flexion, it really is a big problem for most people.
Yeah.
So any sort of like loaded flexion, I almost never do. I almost never do loaded flexion. I mean, my other higher level core exercise I like doing is like GHD sit-ups, where most of the actual resistance comes from that hyperextension position to neutral. Once you get past neutral, then you're not really, doing anything like resistance-wise to the flexion. So high-level athletes that need to do that, obviously, can do that. But for like just the average person just looking to improve core strength, I think it's unnecessary, because I also agree that the excessive flexion it's not good.
And what about when it comes in the form of hanging knee raises or toes to bar?
That's a little bit different. Just because you're not just incorporating like the abs, so to speak, you're also getting in hip flexors. And again, with like something with the toes to bar, you are going into that state of extension back into flexion. So you are getting that full range of motion.
Yeah.
I will say that there's a lot of people that get low back pain even just from doing like L hangs.
Yeah.
Just from holding that flex position, or an L sit, holding that flex position definitely increases their pain. So they have to have.
And you think that could be avoided if they properly progress to that? Because a lot of times they're just not strong enough to do it.
I think that there needs to be a balance between their flexors and extensors. I think that's really what it comes down to. Okay. If they're overly shortened in that anterior chain, and they're really weak in their posterior chain, then those are the people that are going to be much more susceptible to that pain with that flexion.
Yeah.
You obviously can progress to it, but I think that, balance, I would say, is more important than necessarily like progressing into it.
So for someone listening, you talk about balancing out the extension. Just give some good examples that people might not know of or think of.
I mean,
so if they're doing a lot of Swiss ball crunches or whatever, what are some other exercises?
Like for extension?
Yeah.
I mean, like even like the Supermans, like spinal extensions, GHD, like hip extensions is one of my favorites for engaging like the posterior chain. Banded good mornings, I think are amazing. I find those to be a lot more effective for me personally than good mornings with a barbell on my back.
Yeah.
Just because it's you're still getting that same resistance without the lever arm that can injure people's backs. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I love plank hip extensions. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a plank position, lifting one leg at a time off the ground,
right?
That's a good lower. A good upper is like the prone snow angels. Mm-hmm. Working on getting again that periscapular strengthening that Lindsay was talking about. Just to again address the whole posterior chain. Do
you guys like swings?
Like kettlebell swings?
Yeah.
Yeah. again, with control. Like, I think a lot of people don't activate their core adequately during.
I mean, you see that exercise fucked up all the time in gyms.
Yeah. So I think, people can, number one, just have poor core control at the top. And then also they're not controlling the descent.
Right.
So that's where people just light up their low backs. Yeah. So I think, with proper cueing and control, that's a great one. Also, like single leg kettlebell deadlifts. That's another great one that we like to utilize a lot for posterior chain activation.
The kettlebell swing is actually an exercise that I use less and less on my clients, because I find that causes more issues than teaching them the deadlift or even teaching them like cleans. Like that's
almost less of a margin for error.
There really is. And most people just don't know how to move well enough to do a proper kettlebell swing. I forget what I was just going to say. Oh, RDLs. That's another huge one that I love doing. Barbell RDLs to really load the posterior chain, get those hamstrings actually active, because that's another thing that most people have very weak is hamstrings. That's another great posterior chain.
Talk about the value of unilateral exercises. You guys place a lot of importance on that if someone wants to be well-balanced, healthy, injury-free.
I think that's something that like CrossFit kind of was lacking years ago. We talk about like 5 years ago, things were very different than they are now. CrossFit, I feel like back in the day, like would kind of frown upon like bodybuilding type of exercises. No, we don't do that kind of stuff. But I think recently people have become much more aware of the importance of the isolated strengthening to make sure that you're evening out any muscular imbalances and things like that before, trying to do these more gross level activities of, higher function.
Right.
So yeah, we're really huge on those types of things. And I think that they can also expose a lot of weaknesses. Even just like carrying a kettlebell overhead, single arm, just how much you have to activate your core and your shoulder complex and everything to keep that activated. It's really humbling, like how simple looking exercises can be so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, the single arm, single leg stuff is something that I try to progress into as soon as possible, especially with people who all they do is like squatting, deadlifting, things like that. It, like Lindsay, you touched upon, is that it identifies weaknesses on one leg versus another that you would have no idea unless you address that. Another thing that people really lack is balance. Everyone assumes that you get weaker as you get older, but really, most people never address their balance effectively. And so, like, as you age, that's the reason why old people fall, because their balance is terrible, because they haven't probably addressed it in 50 years. So, like, the single leg balance exercises are super important to stay healthy. It's one of those things that I see when I work with runners. We focus a lot on the single leg stuff. They typically have weaker glutes, like lateral glutes. So it's something that they benefit from. But like the average Joe, for sure, I think that we underutilize the single leg, single arm stuff a lot.
And any ones that stand out that you really like a rear foot elevated split squat or a lunge variation? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I love like Bulgarian split squats. That's an exercise that, again, a lot of people, the first few times that they do it, they're not very good at. But when you can get someone to do a really effective split squat, they will notice strength gains almost faster than like a traditional squat. And again, you're just working on so many different body parts and so many different systems, balance, strength, mobility, like all those things that was required with a good split squat. That's definitely one of my favorites.
Do you have any preferred way of sequencing the loading that? You know what I mean? From holding it here versus goblet, front rack, overhead?
I do. I mean, personally, I love going, no weight, and then I'll go into goblet next, because I just like keeping the weight as close to their core as possible, because it'll engage their abs and it's just easier for them to control. From there, I might go single arm carry into double arm carry, and then progress into fun things like holding a dumbbell over their head or just a plate over their head with two hands, progressing into single arm. I don't get to progress that too often once we get to that point. But those are some progressions I love doing.
Nice. Did I cut you off? Were you going to add some other single leg or single arm exercises?
The single leg posterior chain stuff are also super important. Like one of mine, it has a few different names, but like the barbell, like landmine single leg deadlift.
Yeah, those are great.
Like that's a great one that most people, can at least learn how to do a good hip hinge in the single leg that addresses their balance, but not as aggressively as like a single leg kettlebell deadlift that most people do incorrectly because their balance isn't good enough to do it properly. Like that's one that I really love.
Yeah. Have you played around much with the landmine squats?
No, I have not.
Those are pretty good for people who lack mobility and they can't squat a bar yet. They can usually do a squat with a landmine, kind of just double, That's a pretty good one. Lindsay, talk about your retort to this statement that a lot of people make that are anti-stretching. They'll say muscles don't get short and tight. You just have a weakness. Something's turned off. There's some kind of imbalance.
Well, I think it's so anytime you have an imbalance, there's something that is tight and there's something that is elongated that shouldn't be, right? So I think that this day and age, everyone should be stretching. It's just a matter of what, right? There is something where, a lot of us have different postures that we get into a lot. And so if you, again, we're talking about the whole sitting thing, like sitting really is like the new smoking, right? And I feel like it's like almost broken record. We're always talking about the same things, but it's so relevant, like right now I'm sitting and like my hip flexors are in a, really tight position, and my low back and my thoracic spine, I tend to be a little more rounded. My pecs are getting tighter, all of that kind of stuff. So you think about how many hours I'm spending like this sitting at my desk job, whatever it is. So yes, like I need to be doing stretching and I needed to be doing strengthening. So most people know, if you're in like that forward posture, that you need to be stretching your pecs, opening up that, and then strengthening your back, right? So that is like a general rule of thumb for everything else that we do, right? So anytime you have tightness, there's some relevant weakness, and you have to be addressing the two things.
So let's get specific on that. A lot of people listening to this work jobs where they have to sit for 8-12 hours a day. What should they do throughout the day? Maybe some little drills or tips that they can do throughout the day. And what should they do in their training? Like if they're sitting like this all day, are there specific things that they should or shouldn't do at the gym?
Yeah.
I know it's individual, but
yeah. So, I mean, it definitely depends on the person. However, if you are at your, job and you find yourself sitting like 8 hours a day and you're the only time you're getting up is every like few hours to go to the restroom, like that's a problem. So I tell a lot of my clients to set a timer on their phone, or if they have an Apple Watch, it can buzz them every hour or, every 30 minutes or whatever it is that they find is appropriate.
What's ideal?
I mean, I think that, every 30 minutes is a bit excessive because people are getting into their work and then they're never going to get anything done. So I would say every like 60 to 90 minutes tops.
Okay.
Be getting up, moving around. Again, if people come in and see me, I can identify their specific areas of tightness and give them specific exercises that they should be doing when they're at work every day, and trying to figure out something in their work environment where they can actually do those stretches. So I think that's a huge thing. Also making sure that people are hydrating. I think that's something that a lot of people, know they should be doing again, but actually doing it is, difficult for people. So in regards to that, I mean, there's like tons of little gadgets now, like little water bottles you can put a little thing on it and it'll like buzz every so often when you should be drinking more water or whatever it is. So I think that's huge. And also like keeping in fact, like what we've been talking about is like the strengthening component. Like, again, if you're sitting all day and your glutes are in that tightened position, they're going to be weak as a result. So a lot of times I'll give people little isolated hip exercises to be doing as well throughout the day that can help, keep everything engaged so that they're not getting, back pain and things like that.
And so we mentioned glutes a few times. Mm-hmm. For ladies listening who want to build their glutes, what are some of your favorite exercises?
I mean, for those types of things, it's a lot of posterior chain. So I know we keep talking a lot about posterior chain, but really that's the basis of a lot of these types of movements. So a lot of like hip extensions, GHD hip extensions, the single leg deadlifts, all of those types of things, Romanian split squats or Bulgarian split squats are huge. But I think it's, getting caught up on just wanting to build one muscle group, it gets people in trouble too. Yeah. Because then, you're leaving something else in the equation out.
Right. For sure. Mm-hmm. From a joint health perspective, do you guys, just a random odd question, do you guys think it's better to do 9 sets of squats on Monday or 3 sets of squats Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
I would say it also kind of depends on the load, the reps, like what rep scheme.
Let's say you're doing sets of 5, all sets of 5 with like an 8 RM, so sub-maximal.
Mm-hmm. I would actually, there's a few different theories on this, but personally, I like to squat at least 3 days a week.
Okay.
Okay, because I think that one of the benefits to squatting multiple times per week is, again, you're just constantly putting those joints and the muscles and the fascia through that range of motion.
Yeah.
So you never allow it to get tight.
Right.
One of the problems that I find is that when you just do it like once a week, that, you know, day 2, day 3, after you just did all those squats and crush yourself, if you don't take yourself back through that range of motion, you're just going to get really stiff and it just gets harder to get back into that position. But when you constantly are squatting, when you're constantly putting yourself through that range of motion, ideally I would have you do, you know, like heavy back squat Monday, heavy front squat Wednesday, and then some sort of other squat variation on Friday. So you're still putting yourself through that range of motion, you know, via your hips, but you're just loading it in different positions. So that's much more ideal.
So would you intentionally make one of those days lighter, like a goblet or double kettlebell front squat or something?
Yeah, so I would. I would. So I really believe in the recovery component. Like I don't think that if you had the intention of squatting 3 days a week, if you squatted really hard on Monday, then Tuesday I would definitely do like a posterior chain bias like thing lighter. If you were going to squat again on Wednesday, my preferred method would be to do 2 heavy days, you know, Monday, Tuesday, take Wednesday off, and then do another heavy squat day like on that Thursday, versus doing like 3 heavy days in a row. I wouldn't encourage that, you know, so I would have at least like one buffer day in there. But I love doing like the barbell, like heavy barbell back squat like on a Monday, heavy barbell on a Wednesday, and then some sort of like different functional movement on a Friday, where it might be like higher rep stuff like with the kettlebells to still squat, but again, just target to just different muscles.
Well, let's go further with that. The average person listening has only 3 days a week to train. They want to be jacked like you. You gave the squat. What else would they do in those 3 workouts?
So I love doing a really heavy lift first. So focus all of your energy on that heavy lift. Okay. Empty the tank, so to speak. I love the Wendler cycle for that. I think you can get a lot of strength gains out of that.
No doubt.
Once you do that, I also love following up with like some sort of Olympic lift. Okay. Whether that's hang power cleans or hang power snatches. Again, those are things that give you high bang for your buck because they're multi-joint movements that work on a lot of different things. Work on your strength, your speed, because I think continuing to work on your speed is also very important, the explosiveness. And
so
then
just to backtrack for a sec, Steve, so you would want to work up to trying to set a new PR in one of those big lifts at the beginning? If you can. Listen to your body, be smart, don't get hurt. Okay, and then you move on to where you're going to do sub-maximal Olympic lifting, multiple sets?
Yeah, exactly, because your energy is probably going to be a little spent. You're not going to be able to go like as heavy. So sub-max definitely with your Olympic lift. Okay. And then I would follow up even with just like 2, you know, major movers, whether it's like some sort of like bench press movement, you know, 5 sets of 10, followed by maybe some sort of like horizontal pulling exercise like a ring row, like weighted ring row, something to offset each other. I've never been a fan of, you know, back and bis day. I like to keep it a little bit more rounded. But you can get a lot done in 60 to 75 minutes with just like 4 to 5 movements if you just focus all of your energy on the first movement first, and then you just kind of do the accessory movements after that.
For sure.
3 days a week, I mean, you can still get very strong, put on a lot of muscle mass with that strategy.
And then so that's where you throw in the unilateral stuff too, like in that third block there? After the big lift, the Olympic lift, and...
So my first 2 days is where I would focus on like those, you know, major movers. My third day, if I was just going to do a third day, is when I do the fun stuff. That's when I add in like the kettlebell squats. That's when I add in the single leg kettlebell deadlifts. Like that's like I create that as kind of my fun like reset day. Where you're still working yourself really hard, but you're just not taxing the CNS the same that you did Monday and Wednesday.
Would you add a finisher to each day?
So I love doing high rep finishers. Like things like, for example, like even just barbell good mornings. I love doing like 2 sets of 20. Because it's just going to mobilize the fascia. It's just going to kind of flush out all the gunk that you've developed like within that particular training session. And when you leave there, your hamstrings, your posterior chain, everything's going to be nice and mobile. You're going to be feeling good. And it's going to help you recover for the next time that you go in and train. So I'm a huge fan of those types of high rep finishers.
Do you think people overdo the high intensity conditioning and the finishers, and especially if their goal is they're not competing in CrossFit or something. They just want to be lean and jacked. I mean, sometimes I see people just smashing themselves to oblivion with finishers and just hit stuff all the time. You think you agree? People overdo it a little bit?
More is definitely not more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't. I think
And
of
what
all...
people don't seem to know is they seem to grasp that if you do too much strength work, you can get weaker. But if you do too much conditioning, your times on certain things starts to go down. You burn yourself out. Your cortisol is through the roof.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also like getting into the topic of like, you know, your cortisol goes through the roof, and like getting into like the overtraining component and all of that. And I think that that's a huge issue with the high intensity training that people are doing, you know.
You know, because you'll see a lot of these people who they look like Greek gods, you know, like they're in great shape and they look like they're doing really well, but their hormones are all fucked up. Their cortisol levels are all messed up, and like, you know, their sleeping habits, and they're not going up in their lifts. And so what someone appears to be doing right, they're really doing wrong because they're lacking, you know, the recovery time, and you don't need to be doing more exercises. You just need to be doing a very select few at a very high intensity.
Yeah, sometimes we see the outliers that can get away with it, but the average person can't. So we talked about the finishers there. Earlier we said we were going to talk about the cool down. We didn't get to that. So let's talk about you do your finisher, whatever. Now, why is it important to do a cool down? What should you do in your cool down? And then if you guys want to add what you should do in the few hours after training to improve your recovery as well.
So I think it's really important to like take into account what you did during your workout. You know, if you had, you know, heavy bench press day, you need to be addressing the muscles that you're utilizing during that training period. So if you had like a heavy bench press, lots of pull-ups, you need to be really stretching the pecs, the lats, you know, the shoulders in general. Just because number one, if you don't, you're not flushing the system. Every time you're contracting that muscle, you're shortening it. So in order to prevent injury and help with recovery, you need to be lengthening those muscles. So stretching is huge. And also like the proper duration. So I see a lot of people, they'll, you know, get out their ab mat, they'll do whatever, they'll stretch and they'll hold it for like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and then they've get up and they move on. And it's like, if you're only stretching for that short duration of time, your muscles are not fully relaxed into the stretch and you're not getting the benefit. So we like to tell our clients, you know, before you exercise, you still want to be stretching a little more dynamic, like 30 seconds or less per muscle group. And then post exercise, you want to be a little more static, really breathing and relaxing into the stretches and holding each stretch for about 2 minutes. So really, you know, having that proper duration is key. As far as the stretching is concerned.
In a perfect world, we all know people are busy and they're rushed. Mm-hmm. Would you say in a perfect world, how long should people spend on their cool down?
I mean, I would say, you know, you just have to be really efficient with it. Yeah. So
let's say they weren't rushing out the door. They're like, I'm doing whatever Lindsay says. If she wants me here for an hour, I'll be here for an hour. What would be like the best to optimize your overall health?
I mean, I think you could get a very adequate cool down in 20 minutes.
Okay.
You know, I think it's a matter of not doing everything in the book. It's a matter of doing the things that you need to do and focusing that energy really well.
Yeah.
So like yesterday we did a workout that had, you know, a ton of pull-ups and toes to bar and then some like clean and jerks. Mm-hmm. So I spent most of my time stretching out my lats afterwards because 2 of the 3 movements was all lats.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really taking a look at what the movements are and what muscles are being utilized and knowing the proper stretches to do as well.
Yeah. So you are trained in fascial stretch therapy and Fredericks. Talk a little bit about that and what's different about that. What are the benefits of that, and how people can find if they're in LA. Obviously, they should come see you. But if they're not, how can they find someone who does that? Yeah.
So I specialize in fascial stretch therapy, and basically what that is it's an advanced stretching technique where the client comes in, they lay down on a massage table, and we do the stretching for them. So most people absolutely love that because they hate stretching on their own, and people find that they don't know what to stretch. Sometimes what feels tight isn't actually what is tight, and they don't really have the time. So people come in, they lay it down on the table, and we do all the work. And every stretch starts at the joint capsule. So if you think about like your shoulder joint, for example, you could be stretching all the muscles around that shoulder joint all you want, but if the actual joint capsule is adhesed and stuck, which a lot of times it can be, then you're not going to go anywhere as far as like improving your shoulder mobility. So we start every stretch there. We do a lot of joint distraction in a very safe way, but very effective. And then we stretch through something called different fascial lines or fascial trains. And for people that don't know what fascia is, it's like if you take the skin off of chicken, it's like the cobwebby material that you see. It runs throughout the entire body. It encases all of our soft tissues, the muscles, the joints, the ligaments, and it can get very rigid, even though it should be very mobile. So if you're not stretching properly, it just gets more rigid. If you're not hydrating properly, it gets more rigid. And that's where people just get so incredibly tight. They try to reach down and touch their toes, and they are touching their knees basically. And so the power of a fascial line is that there's 7 major fascial lines that run throughout your body, and you could be tight anywhere along that fascial line that could be limiting your mobility. So again, if you reach down and try to touch your toes, everyone thinks oh my gosh, my hamstrings are so tight. And really it could be your calves that are tight. It could be your thoracic spine that's super tight. It could be anything along that posterior fascial line that's tight and limiting your motion. But really people just don't know where to focus their energy. So we go through a typical session in fascial stretch therapy, we go through and release every fascial line with movement, and then we stretch the muscle belly. So it's a much more comprehensive stretch than you can ever really get on your own, and the results last a lot longer, which people really like.
And what kind of stretching is useless, if any?
I wouldn't say that any stretching is really useless. I just think that certain methods are much more effective and can get people where they want to go much faster.
And there was the whole thing years back where people would say that stretching before training. So address the difference that people don't know between dynamic, static, PNF. Kind of talk about that a little bit, because there was that thing years ago that had everyone up in arms of stretching before training made you weaker, but there was so many caveats to that. So
in regards to that, a big thing with that is the duration of the stretch. So yes, stretching before you work out is bad if you're holding every stretch for,
turning off
3 minutes and you're putting your muscles asleep, right? So you want to be more dynamic in your warm up stretching. You want to be moving more. And that's just to get the muscles loosened up, get them warm, get them firing. But again, if your muscles are super tight, they're not going to be able to fire, right? You're not going to be able to produce that energy and that strength in your movements. So you don't want to neglect stretching beforehand from a performance perspective, and in addition to injury prevention. So that's huge.
Yeah. Cool. Some of the other techniques you guys use, Graston, kinesiology taping, talk about those a little bit and the benefits of those.
So we both utilize Graston a lot in our sessions. And for people that are not familiar with what that is, it's basically these specially designed stainless steel tools that are in different shapes, depending on different uses of on different parts of the body. And we take these tools and we rub them on the skin, and it breaks up all the adhesions and scar tissue underneath the skin and within the muscle. And then followed by stretching, followed by corrective exercise, we can really help to realign all the tissues that could be causing limited mobility, causing you pain, causing you decline in your performance and things like that. So I find that combining, doing the Graston first and stretching after is where we can really make the magic happen and helping people improve their mobility. And then I send people over to Steve to really help improve the stabilization and the strength that they need to perform well as well.
Yeah, if you have any sort of mobility restriction, any scar tissue, any adhesions that have formed, in my opinion, there's no better method of getting rid of that than Graston. I think it gives you the highest bang for your buck in the shortest period of time. It's one of those treatments that literally just from 5-10 minutes of that can give you immediate relief if that is your actual main issue is restriction in the fascia and in the muscle.
It's super fun to get, not painful at all.
Not painful at all.
Yeah, I know you're a huge fan of that. But yeah, so we utilize that on really most of our clients, because I would say really most of our clients can benefit from them. Mm-hmm. But we have a nice kind of synergistic relationship in where I might see someone who their main restriction is mobility. Yes, I love to focus on the corrective exercise, the soft tissue work, but then I send them to Lindsay. Say, get your mobility right first, and then come back to me. Likewise, if Lindsay's dealing with someone who's extremely flexible, they really don't need stretching. They need more strength, stability, control work. She'll send them down my way. So we really kind of find that balance of who exactly needs what, because people really don't know.
Right.
Like people will come in and they say, oh, I'm so tight in my hamstrings, and literally their leg goes all the way over their head.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're really weak in your posterior chain. You need that.
Yeah.
Your central nervous system is putting your muscles into spasm because it's not allowing the muscle to move properly because it doesn't want it to. So it's getting people to understand that is where we kind of bridge that gap.
And really, anytime there's any form of dysfunction, there's usually strength and mobility issues. So I find that when him and I both worked in traditional outpatient therapies, you're very limited on what you could focus on, because I had, this client and 6 other people in the clinic at the same time. And the cool thing that we've developed is that we have one-on-one treatment time with all of our clients. And so people have the benefit of being able to come to me strictly for their mobility, and going to Steve strictly to focus on like the strength and stability. So we find that people's results are so much more effective. Like they actually are able to get back to like 100% instead of like, I'm about 90% of where I want to be. So like combining the two is really like the secret sauce to improving function, decreasing pain.
Any other lifestyle modifications, sleep, nutrition, any other things you advise to people to help them improve their recovery?
I mean, sleep, obviously, everyone knows is a huge thing. I think a lot of people
we always
struggle.
just ignore it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I think everything that I focus on is something that everyone knows, but nobody does.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the sleeping thing, I'm guilty of too. Like, I definitely am a night owl by heart. But my profession makes me get up early. Right. So that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, but it's about creating systems that work and routines that work for you. And also realizing like how much sleep you really need. Like everyone thinks they need to be getting 9 hours of sleep at night, and that's not necessarily the case, but there are like sleep specialists that can help you like figure that kind of thing out. And nutrition, I mean, again, that's huge. Eating foods that are really high inflammatory type of foods are obviously not going to help you with your recovery. Right. So, we have a great, partner that works with us in our space, Matt Walrath. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he has a company called Beyond Macros. And we refer a lot of our clients to him because he's really like the nutrition guru in relation
to
he does
nutrition coaching specifically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's something where he can treat people that just want to get, eat better, or like if you want to be an elite level athlete, and depending on what your goals are and what your needs are, the way you would approach it is totally different. So we tend to outsource to him a lot because that is a huge, thing that needs to be considered when dealing with recovery and performance and those sorts of things.
What about ice, heat, anything like that?
Again, with those types of things, I think it really depends on what's going on with a person. There's this whole thing about, ice is bad because it stops inflammation, in which case, sure, it does tend to halt inflammation. But again, it is a good source of decreasing pain for some people. So there are certain times with certain people that, we do recommend ice, but that's not something that it's like, oh, go elevate, ice, rest. That's not something that we typically prescribe to everybody. It's a per case situation.
Yeah, I would, when I get asked that question a lot, I show people like the pyramid of importance, right? The base is your sleep. Okay, if you're not getting enough sleep, I don't care, what your nutrition looks like, because typically it's going to be shitty. If you're not getting any sleep, you're going to eat whatever you see. Yeah. The next level would be the nutrition. The next level would be the exercise. Those things like ice and heat and like whatever, that's like at the very tip. That might make a 1% to 2% difference, which in a high level athlete, they're going to need. But people place far too much emphasis on those things and less emphasis on the things that you described. Yeah. Having a well-balanced diet, having an adequate sleep, having a good
stress
training
management. That's important than all those things too. Yeah.
And again, it all kind of ties back into the sleep, the nutrition. If you're eating like shit, if you're not sleeping enough, your stress levels are going to go up as well. Yeah. So those are things that typically are harder for people to achieve. But if they actually focus their energy on those things, it just makes everything so much easier. You don't need to spend the money on the pre-workout drink when you get 9 hours of sleep at night. Right. If you get 4 hours of sleep, then you're spending so much extra money on all this garbage that ultimately is going to catch up with you in the long run. So those foundational things are really what I would focus on.
Let's shift gears a little bit. How do you guys run a business together and not kill each other? Tough. Tough to do when you're married.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little.
Luckily, we're in a position where we both collaborate a lot with work. We definitely have our own little, divisions that we focus on. So again, like I focus more on like the soft tissue and mobility work, and he focuses more on the strength and stability. So it's like we collaborate, but we also kind of have our own space,
Yeah. Are you conscious about putting in like boundaries and borders, or when not to talk about work when you're home or things like that?
I think that's something that we're constantly trying to evolve with.
Yeah.
Because we're in a really cool point in our lives right now where we're really expanding and coming up with all sorts of new things. And so I find that a lot of times we go home and we're like super pumped to like talk about certain things. But, as a married couple, it is something where like dinner should not always be a business meeting.
Yeah. That's the same thing with Jen and I.
Yeah.
I ask because I know several people who have that, and there's always a challenge for sure.
It's again finding that balance. It's actually very easy for us to work together because we have very specific roles. I have to be a little bit better about not being so messy when her clients walk by to go get stretched. That's something that I need to learn to adapt with. The challenge is really just when we go home and finding when to talk about business and when not, because we're both so exhausted from our day. Because even when we're not doing direct patient care, we're doing marketing or we're doing other things. So it's just like that's where it kind of becomes tricky, and not stepping on each other's toes as far as that's concerned. But it's just a learning process that you got to constantly involve with and just be very open-minded with, and just learn when to shut your mouth and learn when to listen.
You guys have been in business for a while now. What are some business lessons you've learned the hard way, some challenges you've overcome?
I think as service providers, not underselling our services or ourselves. It's one of those things that we really want to help everyone. We truly believe in that. And not selling ourselves short or sacrificing our own time for someone else's time.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times we'll get the person who's like, oh my God, I can only come in at 9:00 and whatever. And then they tell you why. It's well, because they have to go get their nails done and then their hair done. And so here we are making these sacrifices, literally where we're already working overbooked days to make this sacrifice for that person. And really, when you look at their agenda, it's all centered around just things that really don't matter, or you get to realize that their rehab is not actually that important. It's very low on the list. So learning to kind of set boundaries and work specific hours, because if burnout's a real thing, and if we work too much trying to like make everyone else happy, then it just makes us not as efficient at our jobs. Yeah. So
that's a great point that I've always told people for years. If you're in a service industry like this, learn to say no. Like there's certain clients you should say no to. If clients are in there and they're bringing you down, like fire them. It's hard when you have to put food on the table, but long term it's better to say no. Create the business that you want and be around the people that you want to be around. And like you said, if someone's not really that into it and not doing what you're telling them to do, then why are you going to go out of the way? If it's a world champion, you guys work with some elite level athletes and some pro athletes and wrestlers, like if they're in town, sometimes you make an exception. You run out from dinner and work with them because it's important to do and they're going to do it. But if someone's wasting your time, like anyone listening, I give that advice all the time. Fire them as a client.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of finding balance.
Yeah.
And like even I find that Steve and I, we have to go out of town in order to not work.
Yeah.
Because if we're here, we end up getting sucked in. Again, we work out where we work.
Right.
So we'll get stopped by clients like at the gym, which is great. And again, we don't mind it, but then you sit back and you look at it like 3 weeks later and you're like, oh my God, like I haven't had an actual day off.
Yeah.
It's
tough when you love what you do
Exactly.
and genuinely want to help people. But then at the end of the day, you're like, Jesus, I'm fried. And you don't take care of yourself.
Exactly.
So you're not doing any of the stuff we just talked about for the last hour plus. You're not sleeping.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's becomes very hypocritical.
Yeah.
Do as I say, not as I do type mentality.
And I think that's something that's kind of caught up with me lately is like I'm spending all this time treating other people because they're doing too much CrossFit or doing too much whatever to the point where I haven't even had time to work out.
Right.
And so like for me, that's something that I'm still trying to figure out because I went from training 3-4 hours a day, 5 days a week to like maybe an hour a day, 3-4 days a week. And, just getting, setting yourself up to have like your own set schedule and like doing the things that you still find important for yourself.
Yep.
It's huge.
Absolutely. So where can everybody find and follow you guys online?
So you can go to www.simplystretchla.com. I'm also on Instagram. It's just Simply Stretch LA, and Facebook.
And then you can find me, prehab2perform.com, where I have a bunch of videos and free resources that you can use to, help with your warm up, help with your cool down, and just kind of keep you performing at a level that keeps you in the gym and not outside of it. I'm also releasing a brand new device to help with neck pain. It's called the Neck Hammock, and you can go to theneckhammock.com. We're actually taking pre-orders right now, and we're going to launch in Kickstarter end of September, early October. It's a project I've been working on for the last 2 years because, there's so many people with neck pain that I said enough is enough. It's time to give people something that's effective, affordable, that they can use at home. So the handle on that is Neck Hammock for Instagram and Facebook. And I think that's the main ones.
Yeah. And our offices are located in the upstairs space of Paradiso CrossFit here in Venice.
So if anyone's listening and coming to town, they want to work with you guys, they can go online. And
yeah, so on our websites, you can book directly online. You can see our pricing. You can see all of that. And the online scheduling system is super easy. I find that clients really love that because they can sit down, look at their schedules, look at ours, and book directly that way.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks, man.